amazing thing to me is that the early film composers, which include Max Steiner, Korngold, and Franz Waxman, came here not having anything to start with, because there was no art form. There was nothing for them to begin with. How do we begin writing score for film? And the early films, when they began talking, really had no scores. So the original Frankenstein, for example, and the original Dracula, these movies, they have a little bit of almost like what I call a needle drop. At the beginning and the end, it's like curtain up music, curtain down music, and that's it. There's no score. The movie's essentially musicless, except for the beginning and the end.
Who are you? I'm Maria. Will you play with me?
So when Steiner began King Kong, what's amazing to me, it's like I could look back now and I've got thousands of films to think of for influence, but what was he thinking of for his influence, coming up with an action score to a film and how to approach that? So the incredible thing to me is that Steiner was starting with nothing. He was starting with a blank slate, a new art form that didn't exist. And he created a language of a narrative. And the narrative meaning the music is telling the story and builds with the action and has dynamics. And that really began, for me, the entire art of film composition. Right around the same time was The Bride of Frankenstein by Franz Waxman, and that also was stunning in its contribution.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
Korngold began doing these action films in the next decade. Captain Blood and Seawolf and the Adventures of Robin Hood. And now he took it another huge step because he was taking the inspiration of what Steiner had done, but he was turning it into a very precise narrative art form. And that laid out the foundation of what, when you have an adventure movie, if you have an action movie, and you're using an orchestra, I think we still constantly refer back to the template laid out by these composers. There would be no Star Wars. There's a constant referral back to these early scores, which I think people take for granted, that they just did what seemed obvious. Well, it wasn't obvious for them when they were creating it. It wasn't obvious at all. When you're starting a new form, there's nothing to tell you what to do. And I think it's vastly underrated, the contribution that these early film composers made.